This week on Writers, Inc.
The biggest murderers we cover, the most well-known ones, Gary Ridgway, who was the Green River Killer, BTK, who was the one in Wichita. They led double lives. They had families, children. They went to soccer matches, and then they went and killed people at night. People always ask me in interviews why there's such a fascination with true crime, and I always say, because it's when people hear that, they say, how could somebody have a job, have a quote, stable family for decades and be doing all this on the side, and no one can wrap their brain around it. And I think it's just a complete mystery to a normal person. And that's why people will never get tired of it.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie in a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
Patrick O'Donnell.
JP Rindfleisch.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So for us, it is Thanksgiving, but because we are all insane, we are recording today. So happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Turkey Day.
Happy Thanksgiving. And Kevin is not here, but hey, we wish Kevin and his family a happy Thanksgiving.
I can only imagine what Kevin and his family do on Thanksgiving at this point. There's probably, he seems very traditional, actually. Like I could see the sack racing going on in the backyard and footballs being tossed around and like all that kind of stuff going on.
There might be bourbon being drunk. I'm thinking there's like bourbon influence.
I think that's a given.
Yeah.
And that reminds, I got to shout out to Tosco Lee, who's a friend of mine from ITW. I mentioned eggnog like a week or two ago, and I got this bottle in the mail yesterday from them. It's eggnog whiskey. So I haven't opened it yet, but I am very much looking forward to opening that bottle.
All right. If you can't take the whiskey, let me know. I'll be over. I'll drink that.
All right. Patrick, you were telling us about something you heard right before we started recording. We should probably go into that a little bit.
Yeah. The word on the street is that Facebook and Instagram are going to have a direct link to your Amazon account. So you could be just cruising along on Facebook, doing whatever you're doing on Facebook, and whatever merchandise will pop up, and all you have to do is hit one button. You don't have to go to the Amazon store. You're not going to be redirected. It's a one-stop shop and makes it very seamless. Now, I don't know if this is for books quite yet, if this is in beta. The first time I heard about it was yesterday. So I think you might know a little bit more about this, JD.
Yes, I've actually been working on something similar to this with the folks over at TikTok. Basically a store where people can buy directly from the platform and not have to leave. We can send those orders electronically to whoever is going to fulfill. So in my case, it's Simon & Schuster. They receive that information through some type of data feed, and they ship out the books one at a time. So all the platforms are basically chasing this. Facebook and Instagram, I know, are very, very close. It's more, I guess it's like a beta. It's available to some people, not everybody. You can use affiliate links, which is kind of neat.
Ooh.
If you've got an Amazon affiliate account, you can make money on that side too. And for those of you who haven't explored that as an author, you definitely want to check it out, because if you're an Amazon affiliate, if somebody goes to your website and they click on your book and they add it to their shopping cart, and then they buy a $3,000 lawnmower in that same order, if it's in the same shopping cart, you actually get a percentage of that sale. So you can make a pretty decent income off those little side hustles. But I think the gist of this is all these platforms are basically trying to get to the point where you don't have to leave. They want to keep you captive within that platform. They want you to be able to buy whatever within that platform, and then continue scrolling on, make it as seamless and as easy as possible. I can tell you from a book standpoint, it's not quite there yet, because none of them are able to do a pre-order from what I can tell. So you can go live, after the book is live, but you can't collect pre-orders unless you're redirecting to some of those other sites. So if you are redirecting to Amazon, I imagine you could set up a pre-order that way. In my case, because I'm setting it up to go straight to a warehouse, to a distribution center, I can't, because they don't know that they're not able to fulfill that. So like a little bit of a hiccup, but books I think are on their way too.
How long do you think before that's going to happen, JD?
Considering how fast all of this stuff seems to be moving, I think we're going to see it early next year, probably roll out to the masses. I mean, you're going to start just noticing it as you scroll your feeds, because I know you spend half your day just scrolling Facebook. So like as you're scrolling through those feeds, you're gonna start seeing those buy buttons pop up. And it's just going to become more and more prevalent. I think they're just letting people in, like in large groups, just kind of rolling it out in that kind of fashion.
So how do you think this is going to affect Facebook ads? For people who are like heavy into Facebook ads, is this going to even affect it, or what do you think that's going to look like?
I mean, the way that I see this, the way it's been explained to me is people are going to be able to click like directly on that ad and buy the book right there without having to go anywhere else. And like they're not even leaving that page, which for some people is kind of a thing because, if you're scrolling through your feed, you don't want to necessarily leave that feed,
Right.
midway through, seeing whatever it is you want to see. You want to, so some people will, if they see an ad they like, they might just pass over it and then go back to it at the end or whatever, but they like to finish what they're doing in Facebook. This allows them to stay within Facebook. Like they want you to we're already addicted to these platforms. They don't want you to ever leave. So for better or worse, I guess from a consumer standpoint, it's good. But, Joanna Penn's been talking about direct sales for a while now. And this is just another, thing that's building on that. I think a lot of the retailers are probably getting worried about this kind of thing because the more prevalent it becomes, the less we actually need, stores. And we saw this to a certain extent when the internet first took off, for those of us that are a little older, when the ability to actually buy stuff on the internet first popped out there. It was kind of seen as a novelty at the beginning, and there was very little that was actually available, and it was kind of a hassle to get things shipped to you. It was expensive. So, for the most part, it didn't impact anything. But within a couple of years, they ironed all of that out, and Amazon obviously steamrolled everybody and made it so easy. Like you can just order from your phone while you're walking from your room to your kitchen, and rather than running over to Walmart. People want convenience, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think anytime you can make something one click, sales go up. I mean, last night I Ubered my son fast food because I was too lazy to cook. So one click, get it over here. I'm a one click positive. So for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. JP, what's in the news?
All right. Number one in the news, NaNoWriMo board steps in and temporarily closes online forums. So NaNoWriMo, or National Novel Writing Month.org, their board has temporarily closed the online forums due to varied concerns, particularly around moderation inconsistencies and community safety, to conduct an investigation. The board received over 120 pages of information from members and about 50 pages of requested documentation from the NaNoWriMo staff that resulted in them stepping in and shutting down the forums temporarily. While the claims of child grooming are still unverified by the board, they have emphasized the precautionary nature of their actions pending a detailed investigation. Recognizing that the community's growth has outstripped resources, the board views this as an opportunity to recalibrate. So the following information is information that I've read from screenshots and conversations, but I still think it's valid to talk about. There was a claim about child grooming. Supposedly the original arguments or information was brought to the staff back in June, but action had not been taken to the boards or to NaNoWriMo until November, when the board was informed. And ultimately, the information, whether or not valid or not, was that a moderator was grooming children and leading them on to a different site. So a note from me would be that regardless of this outcome, it's a really good time for parents who know that their children are using NaNoWriMo to really talk about online safety, make sure that they're aware of the people that they're talking to, that they shouldn't give information out to anybody, including moderators of sites, and that it's just a good time to reset any passwords because there are rumors that that moderator in question did have access to that information.
Wow. Okay. So this was basically one bad actor, like in the
supposedly. It could have been more, but I at least know about one.
That's some scary stuff. I mean, my daughter has no clue what the internet is yet, which is great. But I know that day is coming, and I know, because I write a lot of this stuff in my books, how difficult it is for parents to overcome it. Teenage kids in particular are always 2 steps ahead of their parents. A lot of them have fake. They'll have multiple accounts. They've got the ones the parents know about. They've got the other ones. Like, there are so many different ways around this. Yeah, I mean, you obviously need to stay on top of it, but like NaNoWriMo always felt like a safe space to me, and I guess it does to a lot of people. It's this creative environment, a lot of people helping each other, but it just shows you can't, you have to be vigilant all the time.
Yeah, and kids are definitely smart.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many stories I had from the job where, how did this happen? My kid got sucked into X, Y, or Z, and it's really scary, but I would always tell them, it's like, your kid has no privacy. If they're on whatever device or whatever, it's your job as the parent to know what they are doing. A lot of people are like, I don't want to be that parent. My kid's going to hate me. They're going to push back.
Yeah, but also, like, can you be that parent? Because they're smart. They use private browsers. Their history's clear.
Super smart.
Like, I've tried to check on my son. You can't see anything he's done online ever. So other than me, like, standing over his shoulder, which I do occasionally do and startle him, like, it's difficult to see what they're doing.
Yeah. Make it so, they don't know when it's coming. Just surprise them. Like you just said, keep them on their toes, because they are one step ahead of you. They do know more about this stuff than we do, but do your best, that way, if something bad does happen, I hope it doesn't. It's like, it's not going to be, well, I was sitting on my hands and I was just hoping that it would get better. That's not a strategy.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from some parents that are actually doing this, because like, I love what you said, Patrick, but I know it from being a kid that, like, that doesn't work. That's like the random search of the kid's bedroom that you'll get away with it one time, and then your kid will adapt very quickly and come up with some way, some workaround, so you don't have to deal with that. When you can walk into a store right now and buy a burner phone for $10, you can have fake profiles all over that burner phone. Your parent, your friend holds onto it for you. Your parents never see it. For me, like, the way my wife and I are approaching this, and this may be right, it may be wrong, if there even is a right answer, is to just keep an open dialogue and, hope that if this kind of thing comes up, our daughter will be willing to talk to us about it. My parents were like that with me with drinking. Like, we drank when we were in high school. Yep. My parents knew when we drank. Like, I could call my dad and I could say, hey, I need you to come and pick me up. And I had many friends where that wasn't the case, and they hid all of it from their parents, and things just spiraled out of control and got worse. Whereas, I got in trouble, but not because of that. So.
Yeah,
I wonder, and of course, I don't have kids of my own, but I wonder if it's, instead of shifting the focus on that parental observation, shifting the focus into saying that your personal data is your power, and really show them the fact that they control that, and that they should be questioning when people ask for that information. They should be questioning when people try to guide them to other locations. There are TikTok accounts where someone can look at a profile picture or even a username and find you. So show them those and talk about that and say, like, this is how people are finding you, and show them the data trails. Because to me, if I were shown that, I would probably realize how important my data is, and I would try to hold that power. So I don't know if that would work to any parent, but that's what I would do.
That is what I try to do too. You're never giving your real name, age, phone number. You're not getting on a camera with people you don't know. So it's all that kind of stuff. And you just, reiterating that you don't know who that person is. They could be like a 6-year-old man that you're talking to. You have no idea. So I try to go that way, and I do the random checks once in a while over the shoulder just to see what he's doing.
Atta girl, you keep doing that, but the open communication thing, that's also very important. I can't stress that enough, but be diligent. You're not going to foil every time that they're going to be online or whatever, but at least you could try. We had 3-4 detectives posing as like 60-year-old as teenagers, as online, and they were getting propositioned by these like 60-year-old men, on the regular. It was so gross. It was just horrible. And that was like these detectives' full-time jobs. That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Next up in the news.
Cheery.
This one better be happy.
I love segues.
Yeah.
Nope, it's about AI. All right. Artificial whiplash, as OpenAI CEO is ousted and reinstated over the weekend. So Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was ousted by the company's board on a Friday, but reinstated less than a week on a Wednesday, following pressure from employees and investors. Over 700 OpenAI employees threatened to leave following Altman's dismissal, and investors, including Microsoft, exerted pressure to reverse that board's decision. Former Salesforce CEO or co-CEO Brett Taylor and former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers joined OpenAI's board, while Helen Toner, Tasha McCauley, and co-founder Ilya Sutskever were removed following the leadership of Hebel. Altman's firing and reinstatement highlights this philosophical rift in OpenAI, both with the board and leadership regarding its pace, its direction, and what development into the commercialization AI is going to have.
Wow. Yeah, if you were following this, it was crazy. So, last week they announced, or maybe the week before, they would cover the legal fees of anybody who basically got in trouble with ChatGPT. And there's obviously a lot of disclaimers related to that. My general thinking of what's going on here, and this comes more from me working in the finance industry and seeing years and years of startup companies grow. This company has grown extremely fast. And you've got a guy like Sam who's basically created it. This is his baby, who's been forced more or less to bring in, the big money to keep it all going, which brought in Microsoft, brought in this company, brought in that company, brought in board members, and brought in thoughts, that very different from his own as far as how he plans to run this company. There's obviously a clash there, and there's there's miscommunication happening. There's basically what he wants to do, and there's what the board members, what the people behind this, if this company goes public, the people that want to see this and that happen in order for this to be a profitable entity. There's a serious clash there. But that in mind, Sam has been there from the get-go. He's obviously got a huge following. I mean, to see that kind of exodus happen just with him being ousted and now back, they had to bring him back into the fold. That's powerful. And hopefully, I mean, it's going to reshape the company in one way or another. Hopefully they'll find some kind of middle ground in it. But this company is just growing so quickly. It's difficult to deal with this at any level, but at this pace, it's very difficult.
Yeah. And I think what JP said at the end there about the philosophical rift over safely developing AI is the biggest issue. So this isn't a regular for-profit capitalistic company like most startups. It's a nonprofit. That's how they started. So you've got this board who is saying we're developing AI for the benefit of humanity versus someone like Altman who's like, we're doing this fast. So they've called the board, a lot of the board members, AI doomers. So when they were actually trying to replace Altman, they were going to replace him with ex-Twitch CEO Emmett Shear, who was an AI skeptic. So you've got the investors who are tech optimists are like, do it fast, versus a board who's like, oh, you're going to destroy humanity. And they're having that infighting. So it'll be interesting to see, because what happened was the investor said, well, we're going to bring our investment to zero without Altman. And then he's back. So yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, it started as a nonprofit, and I think on paper, technically they still are. But when you've got this kind of money coming in from large corporations, they're driving that car.
Yeah.
And this will eventually become a public entity. They may have to do some kind of spin-off to make it all happen. But Microsoft doesn't invest in something like this just out of the grace, the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because there's financial gain to happen for a very, very long time, and they want to make sure they've got their feet firmly planted in that camp.
Right. Last up in the news.
All right.
Freelance isn't free becomes law in New York State. New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed the Freelance Isn't Free Act into law, aiming at protecting freelancing contract workers, including authors and journalists, from wage theft and ensuring timely payment. This was initially proposed back in February 2022, but it was vetoed due to cost concerns. And this nearly identical bill was passed by the state Senate, and assemblies were with support from organizations like the Authors Guild. The law mandates written contracts and timely payout for freelancers, adding administrative processes for dispute resolution, and empowers the Department of Labor to investigate and act on wage claims. Mirroring New York City's 2017 Freelance Isn't Free Act, the state law extends similar protections to freelancers statewide, covering areas beyond New York City and including administrative oversight and support from the Department of Labor.
I mean, when I read this, I really wish we had this back in the day when I was writing for newspapers and magazines, because we did not. You would turn in a story, and then you had to chase that payment, and you always chase that payment. And newspapers and magazines are always, one week away from being broke, and you're low on that totem pole. They want to pay that electric bill before they're going to pay the person who gave them an article 3 weeks earlier. So this is all good from that standpoint. I'd like to see it spread, but it is, this is a New York thing, and not everybody is in New York.
Mm-hmm.
All right. With that, JD, who's up this week?
This week, we've got Wendy Whitman. So through her decades-long career as an executive producer and on-air reporter for Court TV and The Nancy Grace Show, Wendy Whitman has become an expert on the subject of murder. She's going to explain how she channeled her experience into her latest novel, Retribution, which is out now. Here she is, Wendy Whitman.
Wendy Whitman, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, before we go any further or we get into the weeds with anything, I gotta ask, OJ and Robert Blake, your opinion, guilty or innocent?
I wonder, is it okay for me to flat out say that? I would say, I believe they were both guilty.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I didn't follow the Robert Blake trial all that much, but everybody followed OJ. I mean, it was hard not to. And you were working at Court TV when all this was going on, correct?
Yes, I was.
To me, it was just a showcase. And, I was a cop for 25 years and I was a sergeant for 17 of those. And I was in charge of major crime scenes.
Yeah.
And this just seemed like OJ wasn't really on trial, but the cops were. It was, mistakes and how they handled evidence, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. I think, a smart defense attorney, when they think they have a guilty client, and I'm not saying his attorneys thought he was guilty or innocent, but assuming, let's say for argument's sake, they thought he was guilty, you have to throw a curveball into the mix and do something. Yep. So if the cops didn't do something wrong, then OJ did something wrong, So I think that was their strategy.
Yeah, and it worked. It worked. But the civil case didn't work out so great for OJ afterwards, the wrongful death. But you know what? Let's go back in time. How does a person go from working with Lily Tomlin, George Carlin, and Tom Laughlin, who's also known as Billy Jack, who is also from Milwaukee,
yes,
to working on Court TV, Nancy Grace, and now being an author? How does that happen?
Well, I think, it all sort of just snowballed into, a pattern, I would say. So when I was working for George, I'd always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to go to law school, and it just seemed like a good idea at the time. And it was sort of like now or never. And it was a very hard decision because I was so happy working for him. But I ultimately decided to do the law thing. And then when I graduated, it happened in the middle of the first OJ trial. And I never thought of journalism at all. And I knew I didn't want to practice, but I thought this was the time to get a law degree, and you can use it in so many different ways. I actually thought I'd use it more for entertainment law. But I was back east, and because that's where I went to law school, back east, and where I'm from. And when I had to apply for jobs, I thought, Court TV actually makes total sense. It sort of combines everything. And so I started working there, and 20 years later, I had 2 decades of crime, journalism experience.
So, what kind of, we don't have to dwell on this too much, but I just find it fascinating. What type of fond memories do you have, or little stories about either, like George Carlin, Lily Tomlin, or Tom Laughlin?
I love all three of them. Tom passed away a few years ago, and I was lucky enough to see him a few months before he died. And I was also lucky enough to spend a little time with George a few months before he died. And obviously Lily's still with us. George, I was just very close to his family, and his wife was a dear friend of mine. She also passed away. And George used to always say his mother told him, you have to ask for things in life. And there was the way he said it. It was such good advice. He said, you just got to ask. And sometimes it'll be no, and sometimes it'll be yes, but you have to ask. And both Lily and George are just extremely intellectual comedians, and everyone who knows I worked for both of them always compare them. And I think they are two, people throw around the word genius, pretty loosely, but they truly are two comedic geniuses. If I had the pleasure and rare opportunity of watching them work privately, and how they thought and how they went about creating their routines and things, and their minds never, turned off.
Well, I personally think that comedians are some of the smartest people around, period. Obviously they play that off, they put on their shtick, whatever, their persona is or whatever. But man, you have to be on your game. If you're going to be a good comedian, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Cause they're looking at the world, they observe. I look at it that comedians like that are always observing the world and observing what's wrong with it, what's right with it. Have a very good take on human nature and people and what we have in common and what we don't have in common. And then they put their own unique take on it. And it is really fascinating to watch them work out their process.
So you were working with all these people. You mentioned that you went to law school after that, and you were thinking about maybe doing entertainment law.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So, Do you come from a family of lawyers? Is this something
I do not. I do not. I come from a family of doctors.
Oh,
but I
okay.
was too squeamish. I was too squeamish.
Gotcha. So you go into law school and you're kind of thinking entertainment law. Then where did your life take you after that?
To Court TV.
Oh, straight to Court TV.
Straight
Okay.
to Court TV, yeah.
Okay. And did you ever consider a career like in law enforcement or being a prosecutor?
I never thought of law enforcement. I think when I was a little younger, maybe high schoolish days, early college, I used to think, oh, I'd be a great prosecutor because I would be relentless. I would, get them. But when I actually was in law school, I knew at that point in my life, I didn't see myself practicing as an attorney, even in that capacity. If I had decided to practice, I think that would have been a really fun thing. I have some very close friends who are Manhattan DAs, and it's very interesting to hear their stories and how they approach a case. And I'm also very friendly with Jerry Boyle, who was Jeffrey Dahmer's attorney, and I watched him in court in person, not for that case, but for another case, and to watch the way he woos a jury and presents his case. It is a very unique skill to be able to do it and do it well. And you have to be very smart and really on your game. Oh, yeah. So I think that would have been a fun challenge, but ultimately I never did it.
Okay. Now, Court TV, how long did you work at Court TV?
I worked at Court TV for about 15 years, and then I went to Nancy Grace's show for about another 4. So roughly 20 years between them. Okay.
What was your primary job at Court TV?
When I left, I was vice president in charge of all the live trial coverage. So that included part of a team that selected which trials we were going to cover, overseeing the production staff, field stuff, coordinating everything pretty much.
That sounds like a very hectic but kind of fun job to have.
My job was my vacation. I loved it. We were so happy there. We said it was the best kept secret in television. It was the most amazing place to work. And we did it. We did a fantastic job covering things. We never sensationalized anything. We always respected all the players involved, and it was the best job in the world.
Now, I imagine that for all these years and all these trials, you see a lot of negative. You see a lot of the ugly in society. Did that kind of wear you down, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. There were a couple of cases we did that I literally had nightmares for months, and it was impossible. I would put in very long hours there. If we were doing a West Coast trial, say like Robert Blake or something, or OJ, something like that, it would be common for me to be there till 2 a.m, and you're putting in such long days, and you're so involved in the case and so invested in everything, and you hear such horrific things every day. And of course, it taints your whole opinion on human nature. And we were all paranoid and suspect of everybody because we covered, cases where the defendant was a lawyer, a doctor, or it could be someone who was homeless. It could be someone who, just ran the gamut of everything. Anyone can be a murderer. And I think a lot of the biggest murderers we cover, the most well-known ones, Gary Ridgway, who was the Green River Killer, BTK, who was the one in Wichita, they led double lives. They had families. Children, they went to soccer matches, and then they went to kill people at night. And it's bad. And people always ask me in interviews why there's such a fascination with true crime. And I always say, because when people hear that, they say, how could somebody have a job, have a quote, stable family for decades and be doing all this on the side, and no one can wrap their brain around it. And I think it's just a complete mystery to a normal person. And that's why people will never get tired of it.
So how did you cope with that? How did you cope with all the negativity and all the, everybody's a killer and, and all this kind of crazy stuff?
Well, part of it, linking it to George and Lily, I always, when they say, how did you go from comedy to crime? We used black humor at Court TV as a defense mechanism against everything we saw all day. So we were like the king and queen of black humor. So I think that was a huge defense we used at work to deal with the awful things we saw all day long.
Yeah, and I think that's very common with doctors, first responders, et cetera. The gallows humor is a coping mechanism.
Oh, absolutely. It really is.
And the more horrendous the situation, the darker the humor got, really.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes. So how difficult was it going from being this court reporter and, producing all this stuff to that is real life to writing fiction? And why did you pivot to that?
Well, we all got laid off in 2009 when they changed Court TV to True TV. And then that's when a lot of us went to Nancy Grace's show and see other things at CNN and HLN. So it was sort of, when we were leaving, a friend of mine there said, you need to write a book. And I thought that's funny because I've been thinking of that, because I felt I had literally decades of knowledge of those intimate details of some of these, even some of the well-known crimes. There are hidden details that never really got publicized that people don't know about. I thought I have this whole wealth of information and people are so obsessed with true crime. It makes sense to write a book. And I was going to write a nonfiction book. And I know it's going to sound like contrived, but I literally did wake up in the middle of the night one night and I realized I could write fiction, not nonfiction.
Okay.
And I started writing. I wrote till 5 a.m, and then I literally wrote every day for the next 3 or 4 months till the first draft was done. So it was always in the back of my mind to try to write a book. I just didn't think it would be fiction. And then when I wrote the first book, I knew I had to write a sequel. So that's how it went.
You know, it's like you had a front row seat to all this craziness that, most people, just are oblivious to. And,
or they certainly don't think about it all day long. They're not always thinking about it.
Absolutely. But, for most people, it's that thing that happens somewhere else. It's not in their lives until it happens to them or a loved one, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, you pivot that. And another thing I would think, because true crime, like you could have your own podcast, you could have your own something. Right. There's a lot of directions. You still could, obviously. I mean,
I thought about it.
Yeah, well, I think you should. You get
I know.
It's red hot right now. Just throwing it out there. I think you'd have a lot of interest, and you literally had a front row seat to all of it, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So now you wake up in the middle of the night and you start writing fiction. Did you tell anybody that it's like, hey, you know what, this is what I'm going to do?
I didn't until the first draft was done, because I felt superstitious about it. Because then I thought, what if I don't finish it? Then what's the big deal and all this? So I sort of did it more in secret until once the first draft was done. I felt good about it. Of course, I still didn't know if I'd get a publisher, but I felt more comfortable telling people, hey, I just wrote a book, kind of thing.
Right. Because you're really putting yourself out there, it's
absolutely. It's quite a journey. It really is.
It is. My hat's off to everyone who has the guts to hit the publish button, because, you are literally throwing yourself out there, and there's all the trolls and all the naysayers or whatever else.
Yeah.
And odds are you may not be a best-selling author. It could bomb. It could do, whatever.
Absolutely.
And you put all this work into it, and then you feel like, you can be so deflated.
It is a very difficult road. It really is.
It is. So let's talk more about your books. Why do this? I know you woke up in the middle of the night and you had this epiphany. You started writing this first draft. It could have just stopped right there, but you kept on pushing forward. What do you think was pushing you in that direction?
Really, what was pushing me, I always say my first book was a tribute to murder victims. And there were, even though it was fiction, I incorporated little bits of true cases, about 20 true cases throughout the book, from the protagonist's thoughts and all of that, because she was loosely based on me. So I really do think what pushed me, I knew what I wanted to do with the first book. In my mind, it was fiction, but in my mind, I wanted to do very specific things that I would have done in a nonfiction book. And I highlighted 2 cases that I got obsessed with that never got, I always say they got cheated in the media, and that was Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom's murders in Knoxville, and the Wichita Carr brothers case. They murdered 5 people. And those 2 cases were the 2 cases that haunted me the most from Court TV. And I felt they never got the right coverage that they warranted. And so I put them in the book, and even though it was fiction. And I think that's what drove me to get the book done.
Okay. Now, your debut novel is Premonition. That's correct. Book 1 of the Deer Killer series.
Correct.
And that's, if you look under the genres, it's under serial killer fiction.
Right.
Now, why do you, we talked about, like true crime is red hot, people are very interested. Why do you think they're so interested in serial killers? Where's the fascination?
I think part of the fascination with the serial killers that they obviously keep getting away with it. Like there are people, like the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo, BTK, Dennis Rader, the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway. They killed for decades. And I think, so part of the fascination, I think, with serial killers is the fact that they're obviously getting away with it, which is very unfortunate, because if they, like even in the Golden State Killer, there were about 2 or 3 times where in theory he should have been caught and he wasn't, for different reasons. Right. And that would have saved other lives, obviously. So I think serial killers versus someone who just does a one-off killing, which of course all killings are horrible and awful and they all deserve to be punished to the max and all that. But I think something about a serial killer draws you in because you feel like they must be manipulating people and living their little life, and then they come out and do it again. And I think there's something more intriguing to people about that.
Yeah, like the popular TV show Dexter, that was on for a long time. And he was literally a serial killer, but there was a part of you that felt bad for him.
Well, because he was supposedly killing the bad guys. So,
right.
So you were conflicted with him.
Right. And on top of that, he was, his mom was killed in front of him.
Right.
He had this ultra traumatic childhood.
Right. Backstory.
Yeah. And there's a piece of you that's like, okay, he shouldn't be doing this. But at the same fact, it's like, well, so I think that bodes well as far as having your bad guy not just be one-dimensional.
Right, exactly. And that's what you want to do with characters. I always say, there are only so many plots. People say that people keep recycling the same plots, which even when TV shows and stuff, I think what makes something a success, whether it's a book or a TV show or a film, you have to love the characters and get invested in the characters. And it's really the kind of characters an author or any kind of writer create that makes something successful or not, because like Yellow Jackets is very similar to Lost. It has, or Lord of the Flies, like they're all similar kind of themes, but they got a great group of actors together, a great group of characters, and you get invested in the show, even though initially you say, oh, that's just like Lost. Why am I going to watch that? So I think that's what affects a book tremendously. You have to really get invested in the characters and care about them.
All right. So in Premonition, it's the Deer Killer series. It's a serial killer. Right. When you started writing that book, did you start out saying, hey, I'm going to write a series, or did the story take you in that direction?
I think once I understood how I was going to end it, I knew I had to write a second book. I certainly could have left it after one book, but it didn't feel complete to me. I knew what I wanted to do in the second book, not all the details, not all the plot, but I knew inside, I knew I was going to have to write a sequel once I understood how I was ending it.
Gotcha. Now, book 2, Retribution, which comes out July 25th.
Correct.
Tell us about this book.
Well, it picks up exactly where Premonition left off, and it continues the story. And, I've been asked in some interviews I've already done for it if it can be a standalone book. And I answer sort of yes and no, because I think obviously if you're writing a sequel, even whether it's a series, a third book, or, some authors write 15 books with the same main central character.
Right.
But they probably changed the plot. This is a sequel in terms of that the plot continues and the story continues with most of the same characters, some new ones. And I think, obviously, if you didn't read the first book, you're not going to have as full a comprehension of the story as if you did read it. Could you read it alone? Yeah, and it's hard for me to judge because I already know what's in the first book, so right. It's hard for me to judge if someone just sat down and read it, if it would make sense to them. But obviously, an honest answer would be that, of course, it's better to read the first book first.
Yeah, reading your Retribution, and I have not read Premonition, you can understand most of it. I think that it does well as a standalone because it's a good story. You've got good characters. It's a good story. Now, we alluded to like the movies and that kind of thing earlier. When you're writing a book, either this book or your other one, do you have the characters? Do you have a certain actor or actress in your mind when you're writing these characters?
That's a really good question. I did visualize when I was writing Premonition. Every scene I visualized how it would look, and I did a lot of local because I live in Connecticut. I was drawing on my memory of local places, and I think that makes it. People always say, "Write what you know." You're going to be much more authentic and accurate if I just pick some random place I've never been to. Obviously, I'm not gonna. Even if I research, it's not the same as living someplace and knowing what the place is like. So, I think that's part of the reason why I did set it in Connecticut and everything.
Now, is there a specific actor or actress that you had in mind when you were writing this that you would like to see play these people, these characters?
I was thinking of Jeff Bridges for the detective.
Ooh. Okay.
For Vito, and I had a couple of not well-known actresses, but ones I've seen in things that I thought might work for Hank. And Carrie, I never really was sure which one would play her. But I did visualize the scenes, and I would play around with potential actors. But I think I did visualize the scenes more than maybe the actual actors, although it does help. I think all of that helps you write as you have to see it. Otherwise, it's not even like a real thing, you know?
Right. I totally agree.
In your
with
mind,
you
have to see it. You have to see
yeah,
it.
yeah. And some authors go really deep in the woods. I mean, I've interviewed some authors that they'll have a picture of that actor or actress like on their bulletin board.
Oh, really?
And,
That's interesting.
and they'll have like all the scenes mapped out, and they'll have pictures, you know, of either like, you know, landmarks, you know, that location, a specific actor or actress, and, you know, and they're trying to connect the dots that way.
Yeah.
So when you're writing Retribution, what was your routine? Or do you have a specific routine, or is this something, how does that work for you?
Well, I would say for the first book, I made myself write a certain number of pages a day until the first draft was done, because I felt if I didn't set a goal like that, I just wouldn't finish it. So I did basically the same thing with Retribution. I just hit a bit of I never had writer's block. I hit a bit of a roadblock, because in Premonition, I never did an official outline, but I knew exactly where I wanted the story to go, and I knew what I had to do to get there. With Retribution, I felt more that I could have taken the whole storyline in a million different directions. So after I wrote the first few chapters, I had to sort of sit and take a pause and think, what do I really want the story to turn into, and the plot and twists and all that. And once I worked that out, which took me like a couple of weeks to think through all that until I realized what I needed to do. And then I again made sure I wrote a certain amount per day till I got the first draft done. And once you get the first draft done, there's an endless editing process.
Oh, sure.
But at least you know you have something to work off of. It's different than not having it done. Even
What
if
was
you
your
change things.
What was your word count goal that you had for every day?
My word count?
Your word count goal. Like, how many words?
I would say I would estimate between like maybe 10 to 15 to 20 pages a day.
Oh, okay.
Like that, in that ballpark.
And were you wake up at the wee hours of the morning and start writing right away? Or?
So I write better at night. So I did write during the day, but I often would also write just at night. I definitely do better at night.
Gotcha. Now, without giving too much away, could you tell us a little more about Retribution? Because, you know, like I said, you've got good characters, and you got a good bad guy too that people are interested in.
Yeah. Well, I wrote it from the serial killer's point of view, and which I think people enjoy getting to the mind of a killer. And I always sort of kid around in interviews, sadly to say, it wasn't that hard for me to get into the mind of a killer, because we've covered so many killers. I think I really do start to understand how they think.
Right.
And there was one scene where he kills this one girl, where as I was writing it, it's like, you know, a lot of authors I've gotten friendly with say you'll see that the characters start to take on a life of their own. And I thought, oh, that sounds like such bullshit kind of thing, but it's actually true.
Yep.
And I was writing that scene, and it was like he did take over, and it was so obvious how he was thinking and what he wanted to do to her. And it was almost like scary as I was writing it. And I think that's another thing. If you develop really strong, good, interesting characters, they sort of start, because you start to understand what they're going to do next and where they're going to go. And there were certain scenes I in no way planned to write. And all of a sudden I realized that's exactly what he would do. He wouldn't stay at the diner. He wouldn't do this. He would do this next. And I think the challenge for any author, I really think, is, again, developing great characters, because they'll lead you to a good plot, and you'll start to understand how they think and what they would do and what they wouldn't do, and how the story is going to have to unfold. And so once I decided on the general plot, it was really easy to keep writing it, because I just understood who was going to interact with who and what they were going to want to do.
What I liked about it, again, you know, writing from the point of view of the serial killer, that I did like that. And him kind of taunting the police.
Yes.
You know, the investigators.
Which a lot of them do. That's how BTK got caught.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that was probably my favorite part of that book. It
was a lot of fun writing from the killer's point of view. It was a lot of fun.
All right. So what's next for you? Are you going to write a sequel to this book, or where are we going?
I did start the third book right after I finished the second, because I got an idea how to start it. Okay. And a few weeks ago, I got a thought in my head, and I wrote a few more pages. So I just sort of changed the beginning. I've also been thinking of going back to nonfiction, which was my original thought, because I got a very good idea for a specific book that I think would really be good. It would obviously require a lot of research and take longer to write, because you can really you can really, I think for fiction, you can, any decent writer, I think, can, if once they work out a plot and characters, you can crash out a first draft, which again is going to have to be edited, but you can crash out a first draft of a totally fictitious book in 4 months easily, because you don't really need to do any research. I had to do some research on my book because I put true cases in, and I wanted to remember that I wanted to make sure I remembered all the little bits, the facts accurately. But it's not the same as the book I'm thinking of writing would require a tremendous amount of research. But I think it might be fun to mix it up. But I also might just do the third book of this series and end it as a trilogy, and then go on to the nonfiction book I have as an idea. But,
or a podcast. Or you could do
a podcast. I have been thinking of a podcast.
Yeah, because you definitely have the chops for it. You've got the background. And like I said before, true crime is super popular.
Yeah, I think a podcast would be a lot of fun. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Yeah.
I'd love to be on it. Let's do it.
Hey, you'll be my first guest if I do it.
Okay.
I promise. You have that on tape.
All right. So what would your best piece of advice be for a rookie writer, or maybe even somebody who's been writing for a while and they feel like they're just kind of spinning their wheels and they're not going in the right direction or going forward?
I think my advice would first be, don't even think about a publisher or an agent while you're actually doing your initial writing, because it's just going to distract you and demoralize you. And you have to write about something like, I'm passionate about murder. I've always been passionate about victims' rights. If you write about something, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, that you really care about, the words will flow. And once you get your story straight and all that. So that's the main thing. And then I would also give them a heads up that the whole marketing and selling of the book is a whole different thing than writing it. And that's something that you really don't get a lot of advice on. And it is a minefield. And there's, the writing is the fun part. And then everything after that, it's like learning by gunfire, or whatever that expression is. And baptism by gunfire, whatever that expression is.
Baptism by fire.
It is a huge learning curve, how to market a book, who to hire, who not to hire, what to do. It is the ordeal part of being an author, but the writing is really fun. It's everything after that. I love doing the interviews, and I love being before audiences at panels I've done and things like that. But it's the overall approach to marketing and all that entails that's difficult.
Okay, guys, I got to ask you, OJ and Robert Blake, guilty or not guilty?
Who? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You weren't born yet, JP. That's right. I'm showing my age. Okay, JD.
Where's Kevin? Kevin's the one with the Bronco. We need to ask him that question.
Oh, that's right. The infamous Bronco.
If it wasn't for OJ, we wouldn't have Kardashians.
That's very true.
There you go.
So guilty or not guilty? What do you think, JD?
Guilty and guilty for sure.
Most likely.
They totally did it. I'm willing to go out on a limb.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But people were fascinated with it. There's no doubt about it. I love talking to Wendy. She started out her career being an assistant to Lily Tomlin, George Carlin, and Tom Laughlin, the guy who played Billy Jack. Again, like JP and Christine don't know who Billy Jack is probably, I'm guessing. JD knows.
I know, but do you guys know who George Carlin is? Because he's one of them.
Yes,
I've heard the name.
I know who George Carlin is for sure.
George Carlin, he's probably one of my favorite comedians. I love that whole era.
Yeah. So
extremely, extremely smart guy.
Yes. So one thing that jumped out at me in this interview was when she was George Carlin's assistant, she got to know his family, and she said that one of the best pieces of advice that she ever got that George passed on to her, that was passed on to him by his mom, was you have to ask. And so many authors don't do that ask, and I don't think you could do it cold. I'm not going to try to get a hold of James Patterson and ask him to blurb my book, that kind of thing. But how do authors, or how should they do the ask? How should they set that up?
See, I'm not afraid of making that ask. But I don't pick up the phone. I don't email them straight off the bat unless that's the way they're, I basically, through friends, if I want to contact somebody like that, I'll figure out how that particular person likes to be contacted. And I'll go that route. But, I got to know Dean Koontz because I sent him a copy of Fourth Monkey, and then he sent me an email, and then we just got to know each other after that. I'd never met him before that. Patterson was the same deal. I sent him a copy of Fourth Monkey, and he called, and we started a dialogue, and that turned into a friendship, and we're on book 5 together now. So I've never been afraid to do that, because the worst case is somebody just says no. And then that basically puts you right back to where you were before. But I think it makes you feel icky. Like, nobody likes to make that ask, but in this business, you have to make it. And the nice thing is, every author that you're asking, regardless of how big they are, they've had to make that ask too. So they understand just how awkward it is.
I think asking is hard. It's hard. I mean, yeah, I have a hard time making the ask, because I'm introverted, and I don't know, childhood trauma, whatever. So I have to give myself a stern talking to before I ask, but I will ask. Sometimes if it's something that's important to me, for sure. Yeah. But usually it's the same thing. I don't like cold call people. I don't know that anyone likes that, or that's successful. So usually when I'm asking something, it's somebody I know, or somebody who knows somebody that I'd like to talk to or get advice from. So for sure. Yeah.
I don't often cold call, but when I do, I just call out how awkward it is. Because I'm just like, hey, I know this is awkward, but XYZ. Usually just that open candidness works well. So that's usually what I try to go for, is just trying to be as honest as possible. Like, I know this is awkward, but I'm just asking. So.
Right. Well, I think
don't make me have to ask again.
Yeah. But I think there's
I hate for you to say no and me have to come back again.
I think there's a couple things that are helpful. One is, don't shoot for the stars right away. Maybe if you're going to do an ask an author that's just a little bit ahead of you, like 1 or 2 steps ahead of you. So that way it's again, you're not going with like a top, like a James Patterson or whoever, it's like, okay, find your like middle ground perhaps. And second, be of service. What do you have to offer these people? Do you have a specific skill set? Do you have something, or, it's like, I'm a huge fan of Tim Ferriss, and back in the day, he would go to conferences and volunteer to be like a busboy, cleaning up dishes, whatever, just so you'd have that opportunity to speak to that keynote speaker and pick their brain for 5 minutes, because he already had an in. It wasn't cold, but he volunteered. He worked for it. So that's my 2 cents.
I think too, and I think to be open to whatever a quote unquote counter offer may be.
Sure.
I mean, you may be going in looking for this kind of help or this kind of mentorship. And they'd be like, hey, I'm working on this project over here, and I need a couple beta testers in it, and it'll still help you move forward. Do that. You know what I mean? Like, be open to any sort of difference.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I think it's just important just not to be a pest. Don't go in being like, I've written the best book in the world and you need to, like, go in with some humility, be open to whatever. And if someone says no, cool, don't pester them, right? So,
yep.
So any of you have thoughts on writing comedy? We kind of brushed on it. I think that would probably be one of the toughest things to do.
I write comedy.
Really? You do?
Yeah. Yeah, Nerds is comedic. I do like cozy comedy, but yeah. One thing is like when co-writing, comedy is really fun, because the whole point of the Nerd serial is that I'm writing to make my co-author laugh. My co-author is writing to make me laugh. And so like we have that instant communication back and forth as to like what is funny. And then there's just something about like catty comedic characters, like that sarcastic tone, that I just love putting on the page. So I love that act of comedy and writing that on the page.
I put a lot of it in Fourth Monkey, but then I started getting all the phone calls from the translators, and translating comedy into other languages is insanely difficult. And it kind of got to the point where like it was just overwhelming, and like sometimes it falls flat. Like one of my translators for, I think it was Italian, like they didn't get it. So the book fell flat, because of that. So it adds another dynamic to the whole thing.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's something I haven't thought about. Yeah, I know we had this conversation with JP's co-author about, what was it, Shrek? Something that didn't translate because they didn't have the gumdrop buttons, and the ginger it didn't understand, and they had translated it to something ridiculous, and everyone's like, what is this even talking about?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's extremely hard. I found out that the only one who thinks I'm funny is me. So
But I mean, in most books, there's going to be elements of comedy, but writing just a straight comedy, that would be super tough, I think. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So any of you true crime junkies, Court TV, any of that kind of stuff? Now, I don't think Court TV even exists anymore, but back in the day it did. How about true crime?
Nope.
No? Wow.
Nope.
You guys are in the minority because people are fascinated with it. They can't get enough.
Oh, I know.
Why do you think people are so hooked on it?
I can't answer that. But what I do know is that my partner loves true crime, and I often go to bed listening to podcasts about people getting murdered. So it is my least favorite thing. But yes, I'm very aware that people love true crime.
Yeah, I think what Wendy said about, thinking they're just like the nice next door neighbor, and then you're finding out the horrific things that they did, and you're trying to wrap your brain around that kind of cognitive dissonance. How can you be the baseball dad while you're murdering people in your basement? Yeah, I mean, it is fascinating, right?
I think my wife's father actually lived across the street from the BTK killer in Wichita, and nobody in the neighborhood had any clue. For the reason you just said. I mean, and it's not like they don't put a sign out in front of their house. They don't parade in their front yard, with a knife or anything. Like they're, this is something they obviously they don't want to get caught.
Honk if you love serial killers.
As clandestine as possible. Yeah, but the thing is, being a serial killer, that doesn't actually pay. You still need a day job. Which means you're going to work. Some of them have a family because it's a good cover, or just because they have a family. It's one of those things like on Dexter. Even he's got a job. I think and all those normal things tend to make them blend. Just look out your window right now at all your neighborhood houses. How well do you know those people?
Yeah. Our neighbors had a wood chipper out the other day. I might need to look at them twice. I don't know.
So darker gallows humor, it's huge in first responders, emergency rooms, people dealing with high stress, jobs. How do you guys incorporate it into your stories, or do you?
Well, you honestly probably experience this more than any of us, but I've worked with a lot of people in law enforcement, and I found that when they're by themselves, their humor is extremely dark, and it's a coping mechanism. They basically develop that dark sense of humor, and it helps them get through the stuff that they're seeing on a daily basis, and they don't show it to the public, for sure, because of the repercussions of that. But in the people in law enforcement that I've met, the ones that have that dark humor are the ones that are in it for a long time, 10, 15, 20 years until retirement. They can do that. The ones who don't develop that humor are the ones that end up, moving, getting reassigned from homicide to something else. They can't cope with it without something like that, which I think is telling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just from my experience, the ickier the situation, the more heinous, that really ramps it up. Because like you said, JD, it is a coping mechanism. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in stories or whatever is we never talked about kids. There are certain things that are completely off base. It's out of bounds. You cannot go there. You can make fun of, certain things, but you can't make fun of other things. That's for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's a tricky balance. But okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up on this Turkey Day. JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got Kaz Freer. She's the international best-selling author of Sweet Little Lies. Her latest book is called 5 Bad Deeds, and it releases December 5th.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.